I will introduce the first two speakers. We have Casey Edwards, the co-founder and community coordinator for Cure AP4, and Lauren Doherty, the chief operating officer for Trend Community. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, everyone. My name is Lauren Doherty. I'm Trend Community Chief Operating Officer. At Trend, we are a community-powered data analytics company that unlocks the conversations of those living with rare and chronic conditions. Our whole goal is to deliver insights and real-world evidence to drive towards better outcomes. I'm really happy to be here today because I get to, like you, hear Casey's story. So I'm going to ask her a few questions, but I'm really excited for you all to learn about her journey. She's a fierce advocate, like many who are in this conference over the last few days. So thanks for being here, and thanks in advance for sharing.
Thanks for inviting me.
So Casey, let's just start off. Tell us a little bit about your family's journey and what brings you here today.
Sure. Well, to make a very long story short, in 2016, my 2-year-old daughter had been diagnosed with an ultra-rare disease called SPG47. It was, the genetic testing came from an MRI result that showed periventricular leukomalacia, a type of brain damage. And the neurologist thought, you know what, this might have come from a genetic origin. When we found out there were only 4 families in the world that we knew that had this disorder, 9 patients from the Middle East, 3 of the families out of the 4 blood-related marriages. We were shocked. It's slowly progressive, degenerative, nonverbal to low verbal children with intellectual disability, low muscle tone, leading to kids to walk and then gradually lose ability. After processing, grieving, I realized that SPG47 falls under hereditary spastic paraplegia subtype, which is an umbrella of 80 to 90 different types. And I realized that I could learn from the groups on social media. And immediately I joined a parent caregiver group, and the first post asked the name of the child, the type of their disorder, and where they're from. I read 100 plus of these responses and learned that there was another parent that had a child with SPG47 from Philadelphia. We're in Boston. And they were coming to Boston Children's Hospital in November. And Boston Children's caught wind, media got involved, People magazine covered us, and we knew that if we were getting this media, we needed to be able to filter any money towards therapeutic that would be meaningful for our daughters in particular. And so we started Cure, then SPG47. Over the years, their natural history study got established through the principal investigator of Boston Children's Hospital. They identified that this one gene was part of a subgroup of 4 genes like wheels on a car. Any one of them pops, the symptoms are the same, the car doesn't get where it needs to go, the protein and lipid or whatever does not get to go where it needs to go to do its job. So those parents and families came to us for advice. We changed from Cure SPG47 to Cure AP4, and to date, after having villages and networks and blessings, we have 3 potential therapeutics on the horizon. There's gene therapy, pre-IND, that might be within this year. It shows restorative in smaller, younger mice and more, even a little bit in older mice. There is an FDA-approved drug compound through Unravel Bio that has a poster, and they're amazing, that actually mimics the RNA outcome that the chemical compound found by Boston Children's Hospital has shown to actually move the proteins and lipid to where it needs to go. So we are moving ahead on all of those, and we are hopeful that there might be something to address this disorder.
Thank you. You mentioned that you took to social media, and I know from chatting with you, you've got a large community online and offline. Talk to us a little bit about the value and importance of amplifying the voice of the patient community.
Absolutely. This is so important on a twofold level, maybe more, but more personally, as a parent of a child that gets this diagnosis, your life is shook. Everything, your child's future, your day-to-day, every single thing is impacted, and it is very easy to spiral into loss of control, a sense of self, of what can you do, how can I make a difference at all. And on a smaller level, any parent, just as an ultra-rare disease such as this, that's basically a blank canvas. You know your child, and you may know the differences between siblings or your child's little anomalies. And I started noticing on the social media group that, these kids have a higher pain tolerance. Well, I'll get back to that in a second, but it gives you a feeling of control and power and empowerment, which is absolutely essential to be able to get through the day and to be able to sort of look yourself in the mirror in the future and know that you did something in your power to help your child, to notice that they might get sick after they eat this or act a little differently after XYZ happens. On a bigger, more impactful level, this is going back to noticing that I was learning that the children had a high pain tolerance. This was mentioned by a lot of families, and every introductory family that came onto the page said, my child is a light of joy. They bring so much happiness into this world. Later, I noticed that I asked, and every parent that answered said their child has more joy than the typical child. I noticed that my daughter's nails were brittle, her fingernails. I asked the group, and many came back. I noticed that their nails look the same. I asked about particular thirst, and sometimes my daughter chugs water. I got her tested for diabetes. That came back from several parents that this same thing happens. And it led me to recognize there might be a pathway that is not being looked at the existing investigations, and I found Unravel. And I asked them to do what they do, their magic, and it turns out, there they are, that there are other pathways that may very well be involved based on their incredible methodology, and that it makes you feel like, no, I'm not crazy. This is different. Like, there is something different about the way my child is growing up, and it might offer insight into systemic issues that aren't being looked at closely in natural history study.
That also links to the importance of patient-reported outcomes, right? So say a little bit more about your thoughts on that interesting topic.
Absolutely. So important. Particularly for us, we are in a pain point. It's a blessing that our children's disorder is slowly progressive over a couple of decades, and we don't know it to be fatal. But we also know that any meaningful therapeutic over the age of when they hit the ceiling at 2-3 years old might not show very, very clearly what it's doing based off of what they're looking at now for outcome measures. Spasticity is a major thing that they are focusing on. As a parent, when she first got her diagnosis, if you said, yes, we might be able to preserve her walking, she wasn't walking well at that time even, and I'd have to follow her anyway. But I thought, yes, absolutely, she needs this. Now that she's in a wheelchair and her independence and my independence have gained significant benefits from that, I think, well, especially in the matter of gene therapy, I think, will it be worth it for me, for the insurance companies, to pay $1 million for a child to preserve maybe 600 feet of walking? What are we looking at? Are we looking at stopping the progress, or are we looking at restorative? And if so, there's different outcome measures. And what is meaningful on a day-to-day, within the minute, within the hour, within the week of a child? Surprisingly, I think maybe for myself, I would say if she would maintain friendships. Kids love her. They gravitate towards her. They're funny. These kids, they're funny. And they love attention, but she also doesn't want anything to do with them once they're, like, it's on her terms sort of things. But to know that if she could gain a meaningful friendship in life, or be able to verbalize what is painful to them, because they can't tell you pinpoint where they're feeling things, and they have a high pain tolerance. My son, and my husband both had their appendix taken out, and I can't tell you how many times I've thought, what happens if her appendix bursts? And she can't point to that area of her body. And it's these things that add up that are so important, and it could make the difference between if a gene therapy stops any one of these things, and that makes a huge, meaningful difference for the child. Maybe that's the reason. Maybe it's not preserving the walking, precarious walking to begin with.
Thank you. I'm going to check on the time. We're doing pretty well.
Okay, I've been abbreviating things. I can talk for a long time.
She can. And it's always interesting and compelling. So I want to give you that opportunity. So another question is, when you look out at this audience and you think about your story, your journey, and what would you like them to walk away with? What do you want them to be thinking about or doing as they go back to their regular lives and work lives too, which is why they're all here, right? Hoping to be able to help make a difference.
Absolutely. This is a loaded one for me. It's actually a pain point, I've said. Well, first of all, I've touched briefly on it. Any parent, caregiver, or someone that knows someone that is going through something like this, just to know that any little thing you can do that make you feel like you have control or you have power, you're adding to the research or insights made, then you do that. You pay attention. You talk to the therapist. You listen to what they say, and if you're not being heard, you make sure you're heard. You do the squeaky wheel. I don't know. Sometimes I haven't made some friends, but I've been loud and I've pushed my way through. But the secondary is when she got this diagnosis at first, and they came back with their MRI, they said, we think it's cerebral palsy. And we left before we got the call from the neurologist, and I thought I was sick the whole pregnancy. Like, I didn't do anything that could cause birth trauma, and there was little something in the hospital, which I was like, did that do it? And I thought maybe a virus, and it spun over in my head. And fortunately, being in Boston, the best around, they saw that this origin might not be from some sort of trauma. And so we got the results. But being on the greater education boards, on support groups on social media, I started seeing a trend. I started seeing that uncles had been diagnosed with cerebral palsy until a child, a nephew, a sibling got diagnosed with cerebral palsy as well. And I remember spending a night up to 2 a.m. on a ski vacation where my whole family was sleeping, and I said, there's got to be a genetic connection between cerebral palsy and hereditary spastic paraplegia. And I found it. I found that there was a group called International Genetic Cerebral Palsy Consortium. I might be butchering that, but I reached out to them. One of the genes was mentioned in their webpage, and they said, he came back very quickly. He said, yep, absolutely. We have been working 6 years with 60 different authors to try to get this publication out to prove that cerebral palsy is a symptom presentation of trauma. And it doesn't have to be, or of some origin that does not have to be trauma. It can be genetic, it can be metabolic. And I got them in touch with our principal investigators at Boston Children's Hospital. And they wrote a paper together looking into that. Long story short, they did a follow-up paper. 25% of children and patients with cerebral palsy of unknown origin were found to have a metabolic or genetic origin. Of those, several of them have drugs available that not just might help a little bit, could be dramatically life-changing, like L-DOPA. But these parents have not been told there could be an origin. And every time I practice this, I have balls because this is profound and this needs to be heard. So do whatever you can, because I know business from pharma and how prevalent cerebral palsy is. There is money in looking into that and work for families.
Thank you. That we want to turn it over. Do you all have questions? Sure.
So especially because you talk about how it's usually linked to trauma, like I know that a lot of times moms and parents blame themselves like, oh, maybe I did something and that's why my child is like this. Do you think that now that you know that there's a genetic underlining to basically this disease, like basically the parents now are a little bit easier on themselves and some of that guilt is going to relieve, oh, it's not my fault, this is just the way that my child was born. So do you think that's...
Absolutely. I think that's a very good point because it's a twofold. Because I do know a lot of parents. I did for that window before we heard from the neurologist. I thought, what did I do? I tried to do everything right. Today, was it because I was so sick and I couldn't take the prenatal vitamin? You know, like I thought over and over again. So just alleviating that one aspect of life would be huge.
Could you say a little bit more about the genetic link between AP4 and cerebral palsy? I'm curious why it runs in the same family, and also if you can talk about SPG47, is it a dominant disease? Just so I understand the pattern better.
So yes, I breezed over it because I saw the 5-minute warning thing, but the first paper that was written with Boston Children's Hospital and this group was to determine that there are also cerebral palsy mimickers, which is where my daughter's diagnosis falls in, because the symptoms look very much like cerebral palsy, but it is slowly progressive over the couple of decades. So even I've learned since that actual cerebral palsy from trauma can have periods of getting worse, if sickness, if you're not able to work on things, if you're not putting the effort in, if you fall back. So it could very much look like cerebral palsy based on, you know, but because it's neurodegenerative at heart, it's a mimicker of it. And so an SPG47 is autosomal recessive.
Just follow up. So do you think some of the family members of the parents of the patients with SPG47 actually had SPG47 or another type of AP4 or like a genetic form of cerebral palsy?
So they've all been diagnosed through genetic testing, and a lot of them have had their iPSCs, stem cells done. Like there's been looking at the protein. It's very clearly SPG47 and the AP4 genes. Is that what you're asking, or sorry?
Oh, because you said a lot of them had relatives who, like uncles and everything,
Okay.
had this. Yeah.
Very good question. Okay, so hereditary spastic paraplegia and the umbrella has two different types. So autosomal recessive is often falls under complicated, where it's not just it's not just losing spasticity in walking. It's also could be ocular, hearing, and intellectual disability. It's. I remember someone saying this is the worst kind, so I was like, oh great, thanks. But there's also pure hereditary spastic paraplegia, where kids can be born with no intellectual disability, or it can be adult onset. So there's a variety. So typically the ones that the kids born with it, and then it doesn't slowly progress over time. I mean, those are the ones that look mostly like cerebral palsy. There might be a couple that don't progress as much as our child, so it can look that much more like cerebral palsy.
I think that's all we have time for, but thank you all for being here today. And Casey, many thanks for sharing your journey.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Any additional questions, please follow up with Casey directly. We'll move on to our next talk now. We've got two speakers joining us. Sun Gu Chi, the VP of Computational Genetics from BridgeBio, and friend and colleague Alex Lacoste, AI Computational Biology.